All right. Welcome to Real Talk with Ronnie. Ladies and gentlemen, it is February 2nd, 2022. A lot of twos, right? 2222. And you're now watching Real Talk with Ronnie live. Welcome back to another Roundtable segment. All right. So a lot of things have happened in the last few days. Today CNN, Jeff Zucker is out, right? Because he apparently had, well, not apparently, he did have a quote unquote consensual relationship with one of his coworkers. So he was forced out. But it's interesting that the woman he had the relationship with is actually still at CNN. And actually, I read a report that there's a lot of CNN female coworkers who are very angry at that decision, at the fact that Jeff Zucker had to go, but the woman still keeps her job. What else is going on? Whoopi Goldberg, she recently made some news. She is suspended from The View for a couple of weeks over her comments about the Holocaust. She said that the Holocaust was not a race issue, she's completely wrong. The Holocaust and what the Nazis were trying to do in the extermination of the Jews was entirely a race issue. If you are anybody if you're someone who's ever read a history book, who's picked up a history book, who knows anything about our history, would know that, but not Whoopi Goldberg. But anyway, so she's been suspended from The View for 2 weeks. And it's ironic because her co-hosts are very angry and upset over the fact that she's suspended, right? So let me get this straight. These liberal co-hosts on The View are mad that one of their own got canceled. And she didn't even get canceled. She's just like temporarily off the air, right? But this just comes to show you how illogical and hypocritical the liberals are. They want to cancel you. They want to cancel Joe Rogan or anyone else that has a view that is different from them. But the minute that one of their own is quote unquote canceled, they get up in arms and they're angry. So that's liberal logic for you, right? Anyway, on our show today, we have a very special panel joining us. We have Mike Reyes, who is a regular on our show now. He's like my, producer. So he's on our show. He is the founder of Pernicoin Corporation. Okay. We also have our first time guest, Mr. Nick Murray. Nick Murray is a policy director at the Maine Policy Institute. Hails all the way from Maine, but he's actually from Jersey, so he's a Jersey boy. So we're very happy to have him on our show. To round out our roundtable, we have Mr. Oz Sultan, who's actually a very big name in politics. He was a former Trump advisor. He's a blockchain consultant, and he does a lot of cool stuff. He's also the chairman of the board of Pernicoin, which is coincidentally the same company that Mike founded. So I think there's a relationship there. I think they're friends. I'm not sure, but we'll find out. Okay, so let's bring them on, okay? Michael.
Hey.
Nick.
Hello.
And we are still actually waiting on Oz. Okay, so we're back. Another Wednesday, another roundtable discussion. And Mike, it's interesting to know that we had a roundtable discussion a couple of weeks ago. It was with you, Gemma Carr, and my Australian friend, right?
Yep.
The funny thing about that is that that show did very, very well. But unfortunately, a couple of days ago, I was informed by YouTube that they have taken it down. And
you got your medal, brother. That's a privilege.
Yeah, well, they took it down because apparently we were talking about the 2020 presidential race, and I think one or maybe all of us might have voiced our opinion that maybe we did not think it was the most fair election, and because of that opinion, they flagged it and they took it down for spreading misinformation. So there you go. But anyway, we're here today to talk about a lot of different things, right? And we're going to try to steer clear from the 2020 race because we don't want to get, censored again. And I see that Mr. Oz Sultan just signed on. We're going to wait to add him to the stream when his camera is turned on. But in the meantime, while we wait for Oz, for all the viewers that are watching that might be tuning in for the first time, Mike Reyes, why don't you give us a little intro about you and what you do?
Well, I do a little bit of everything, but for the most part right now, I'm a political consultant, strategist, and an operative. I just spend time working with politicians in most of the major continental U.S. states, congressional races, gubernatorial, U.S. Senate races, and fundraise with them and help them with strategy, posting stuff on social media strategy outreach. And I also founded Pernicoin Network. We spent the past 2 years actually growing the name brand, and now we're here in Rhode Island where we finally got an accelerator program to work with us. And I've done more in the past 5 weeks than I've done the past 2 years. We've got an office space, which is where I'm talking to you from now, one of our conference rooms here, working with Brown University, working with the University of Rhode Island, helping build our MVP, and basically talking to investors all the time. I actually have a news article coming out this Friday as well with Startup Boost in New York City. That'll be a medium, and I'll share it to you, Ronnie, so you can share it to the rest of your network.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mike. All right. Next up, we have Mr. Nicholas Murray. Nick, why don't you tell us about yourself? And first of all, welcome to our show. Thank you for coming on.
Sure, Ronnie. Thanks for having me on, and thanks for the invitation, Mike. I'm glad to join you guys. So yeah, I'm up in the state of Maine, but like you mentioned, I grew up in Scotch Plains. So I moved to Scotch Plains, New Jersey for first grade, and went all the way through high school there, and moved up north for college, and kind of been in this area for a while. But yeah, I worked in grassroots politics in New Hampshire and Maine for. I worked in that area for about 10 years doing candidate races, ballot initiative campaigns, signature gathering campaigns, stuff like that, for student organizations for different local candidates and things. So mostly on the grassroots side, and then moved to Maine, got working on the campaign to legalize marijuana, cannabis for adults over 21 in Maine in 2016. So that was sort of my first. It wasn't my first campaign job, but it was definitely the most intense campaign I've worked on, from the signature gathering effort through the general field work. So I was still doing the grassroots side there. Following that campaign, jumped on with Maine Policy Institute, who I've been with for a little over 5 years. So we're a small think tank. We do public policy research and advocacy on the state level in Maine, primarily focused on getting government out of the way generally for folks who want to expand individual liberty. So it means getting as much money back into Mainers' pockets as possible, making sure rules are as easy to navigate, and the state is a friendly place to start a business and start a family. We're a very rural state. We're a very sparsely populated areas in Maine, so we need more people. And I think free markets will attract more people and more investment, and help develop our state a little more. So that's my goal.
Great, perfect. Thank you, Nick. And last up, we have Mr. Oz Sultan joining us.
Hey,
hello,
folks.
Oz. Thank you for joining Real Talk with Ronnie. This is your first time on our show. I understand you're a very big guest. So thank you. We are humbled and honored to have you on. So, Mr. Sultan, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. In the past year, I've been fighting getting over cancer. So I'm sorting through that. So I apologize for how I look right now, but it's just it was one of those days where I'm like, yeah, we're just throwing a hat on. I'm a district leader for the 72nd Assembly in New York. I oversee I'm the co-chair of the Harlem Republican Club. And what we're doing is we're merging and turning that into the Uptown Republican Club. So we're going to be extending to cover from 96th Street up. I've worked extensively inside of the blockchain arena and on blockchain policy. I've done some work, helping Mike out with legislation in a couple of states. We also are seeing legislation move forward in Rhode Island again, which is kind of exciting. We talked with our colleagues in Maine about, potentially bringing some resources to bear there as well. And, along with what I want to do is I want better blockchain legislation in the United States. I want better standards. I want less taxation. And I really want an opportunity for us to allow this to help America proliferate the same way the internet did. And unfortunately, we've got a lot of legislatures across the country that don't seem to understand that.
Okay. Wow. Well, thank you, Oz, for coming on. And, we wish you a speedy recovery with your cancer,
Thank you.
So, last week we had a crypto convo, right? It was our roundtable discussion. It was me, Mike. We had Kira on, and we were talking about the advent of, cryptocurrency, blockchain, and Bitcoin. And it's too bad we didn't have you on last week, Oz, because I think you would have been able to give us a better insight on this whole phenomenon. So while we have you on right now, right, can you tell us a little bit about what exactly is blockchain, crypto, and everything that is related to this field? Because I think
blockchain, very simply put, is a immutable ledger that allows you to get rid of third parties. So whereas previously you used to have to use the bank for things, you can now use a cryptocurrency to pay for things. You can also use cryptocurrency scheduling systems to bypass using banking payment systems. The ledgers themselves have a tremendous amount of additional use, and that's anywhere from, I would say, corporate America through any kind of provenance systems that you need out there. Anytime that you need to document something, anytime you need to verify something, that's what the technology is really great for. The first use case of it was Bitcoin, which was, all right, let's take a blockchain, let's turn it into money. What was really interesting was about a little over a decade ago, you can mine Bitcoin, and Bitcoins were going for like a couple of cents a piece, right? And there was always the pizza test, and I think that's been the test in a lot of industries. It's like, can I go and buy a pizza with it? And you could buy a pizza with Bitcoin. And then the proliferation of additional industries came. You had the whole period of ICOs that pretty much went from 2014 through about 2018, and that was one way by which these things could be funded, very much like IPOs, but instead of having to go to accredited investors, you're just raising from the market, and people are doing it globally. And today what we have is a move towards additional blockchain technology. We're also going into additional arenas. So there's decentralized finance, which is basically creating things like ETFs, but doing this with singular currencies and singular platforms. Bundling multiple cryptocurrencies to actually create ETFs. And then we're seeing all sorts of interesting stuff hit the market. And that's use cases for this that have no financial lock. So the Council Exchange Board of Trade, which I advise, is looking at government blockchains from the Office of Management and Budget down. And a lot of this is, how do we replace all these old antiquated systems where we just don't have trust? And that's one of the biggest challenges I think that we're going to be facing this decade across the country. Because if you go into the federal government and you look at like what people are running payroll systems on, half of that technology is 20, 30, sometimes 40 years old.
Right. Yeah. Another issue we talked about last week in terms of blockchain and this new technology is that because it's so new, right? There doesn't really seem to be a structure that is put in place to oversee the activities of Bitcoin and all these different types of cryptocurrencies. So what are your views on that? Do you think that in the future, as this new technology gets more understood, there will be a system that's put in place to kind of regulate it?
The challenges I think that you want to look at right now are that we had the Office of the Comptroller of Currency, we had the SEC, and we had a couple of other federal organizations basically say that they want the states regulating this. And what this has been thus far has been a state-by-state states' rights type issue. And you're seeing it in some cases it operates like a currency, in some cases it operates like a commodity. If it operates like a commodity, what that basically means is every time that you sell it, you have to pay capital gains tax, or you have to at least have it set so that you can pay the capital gains tax at some point. And in many domiciles, it's just treated like currency, right? And that's really kind of the challenge that we have to deal with as this starts matriculating into the mid-2020s. Is there going to be some sort of standard by which states treat this? Because if you have multiple types of treatment of this, it becomes a little complicated. It's also complicated looking at it like a commodity, excuse me, in the sense that you have to basically pay a 40% tax every time you want to use it. And what you're seeing is that in many cases that folks that are getting heavily involved with this are moving out of certain domiciles where, that has been the case. We've got some states like my state, New York, which passed onerous legislation like the BIT license, which make it very difficult for companies to come and play. And you've got all of this really kind of nebulous legislation across the country. And then that's not even touching on stuff that's international. There's multiple domiciles across the globe where you can actually set up cryptocurrency companies, outside of saying we're setting up something in the United States. The mainstay of domiciles that you're looking at are like Cayman, the United States Virgin Islands, the British Virgin Islands, Malta, Singapore. Gibraltar was on the table for a while. And you've got a couple of European countries that are trying to jump into the fray. But that's for setting up a company that's operational inside of the Bitcoin and the blockchain space, right? And that could be utilizing a thesis like Bitcoin or something like Ethereum to create your own token. It could be using something like, Binance Smart Chain to create your own token. There's a variety of methodologies out there. But that's kind of the challenge because this is a very technical thing. And it's not, the easiest thing to learn. There's a learning curve to all of this stuff. I teach at Medgar Evers, which is the closest thing to historically Black college that we have in New York City. And I've lectured at CUNY extensively, and I've had our own students basically tell us that by the time they come out with a degree, that it's obsolete because there's zero blockchain knowledge. And what we're seeing is in many areas across the United States that's the challenge as well. So this goes and harkens back to 1996, and that's in two ways. One, the number of users of cryptocurrency globally is pretty much parallel to the number of internet users we had in 96, 97, right? And then secondarily, the legislation within the United States and globally is still a little nebulous. India is talking about a 30% tax on all cryptocurrency usage because they see it as something that they can tax, and it's a very high tax country. They operate at about 70% on average, which is very similar to what we had in our taxes prior to the 1970s in the United States, but there was reform. So that's what you're going to be looking at. You're going to be looking at shifting state legislation. You're going to be looking at the opportunity for companies to rise up and build up. And you're going to be looking for the opportunity for a lot of new financial systems to be deployed. But there's going to be a ton of education that needs to happen in order for people to really get this and to be able to utilize this effectively. And then there's, the last mile stuff, which is how do we get the average consumer educated on this so that they can figure out, one, how they use this for commerce or to buy things or just to not use cash and to use this. There's folks like Ken Bozak out there who pretty much just live 100% on cryptocurrency. And then there's the flip side of that, which is, what are the long-term plays and long-term use cases, not just for people, but for states, for creating new types of financial products that are out there. And then even things like crypto-based loans or crypto-based bonds that could be issued for states or legislatures or even cities. All of that stuff is coming inside of the next decade. And, that's what makes this thing kind of exciting. It's just think about everything that we were able to do with cash, you can now do with crypto.
Wow. Thank you, Oz. And now I can see why you're an expert on this field. And we definitely should have had you on last week, right? But thank you, Oz, for that great, talk about crypto and everything that is related to crypto and the advent of this new technology for our future. Now, Nick, I know that Mike Reyes is trying to make Rhode Island the blockchain capital of the U.S.
It's true.
In terms of Maine, what is Maine doing with blockchain?
Not too much as of right now. So it's interesting just thinking while Oz was talking, there is a big knowledge gap and education gap, and not only among consumers. And I think the analogy to early or mid 90s internet usage is a good one to crypto now. But there's just so much education that needs to happen on the legislative level. The public has a very limited amount of knowledge, and legislators probably have less on average. So that's been the big struggle or the big challenge or hurdle for me to just break into the space. So there are folks out there that get it, that see the value, and I think a lot of those folks are generally free market oriented. So they're looking for different investments, or they're interested in economic instruments and financial instruments, and those are the same folks that don't want to see any new regulations put in on something. So that's been how I've been trying to, and working with Mike, just trying to visualize how good blockchain laws fit into a state that doesn't have anything in our laws that mention cryptocurrency or virtual currency or blockchain whatsoever. And I mean, that's a whole aspect of setting the banking system up. That's one aspect that we're looking at, allowing maybe state chartered banks to hold it. Hearing Oz talk about some of these crypto-backed bonds. There's just so many ideas out there. I mean, we've had folks, I mentioned the cannabis legalization initiative. There's folks in that industry here that would like to see a state bank that would protect them to use conventional or more conventional banking tools rather than just cash, since federally chartered banks can't have, money from Schedule 1 substances going through them. So you have to sort of get around the federal banking laws. So they say, oh, well, let's have a state bank. And, that's a way to go about it too. But I think I'm probably more on the side of, let's just open up the regulations for banks to use and hold this and maybe leverage it in instruments. But otherwise, our biggest problem here in Maine is that we don't have a friendly business environment. We have relatively high taxes for a state that has 1.5 million people, and has about as many people as a small state, but the same land mass as the rest of New England. So the rest of New England has about 5 times our population, but we have the same land mass. So it's something that we are not building the right future for ourselves by having a high regulatory, a high tax environment. We're already not attracting the next wave of businesses, the next wave of, there are some software companies here, and I think it's sort of an extension and outbleed of Boston, the greater Boston area. But, to get to the blockchain sphere, we need to just be more friendly to business in general. I think that will attract entrepreneurs here at first to say, hey, I want to base my company in Maine, and the technology will follow with that. I think at this point, if you're an entrepreneur interested in the blockchain space and you want to base your company in cold northern New England, you're probably going to go to New Hampshire because there's no income tax. I mean, you might go to Rhode Island, but man, the tax environment in Rhode Island is nothing compared to New Hampshire. So if you're going to be here, well, so I mean, how much friendlier can you get the regulations to be that overcome the actual pull of the tax environment? To me, I think that's probably the bigger driver, but we're so far behind that. So it just gets back to the whole idea. We need to educate the lawmakers, we need to educate the public on what the benefits are of this new technology, and maybe they'll see that it's, that's the key to the future, and that's how we get to growth in the 21st century and all the cool things that are going to happen in the next decade, so we're not left behind.
Okay. Thank you, Nick. So as the policy director at the Maine Policy Institute, when you're coming up with new policy, right, do you come up with this policy with blockchain, in the back of your mind? Like, do you try to, incorporate it into your policy, or what do you do?
Well, from the last few months talking with Mike about this, and we're on the second session of our legislative cycle, so we really don't have any opportunity to seed any new legislation until after the elections later this year. But in terms of thinking about where blockchain fits in, you can go multiple different ways. You can go in the business regulatory side to attract companies that are using blockchain and developing new solutions for the broader public. But then there's that whole other side of implementing and bringing blockchain into state government, so that you have the vital records are more secure, payments are more secure and cheaper. I mean, think about the billions of dollars that the federal government sent out to different states and through different programs over the last 2 years, it was something in the inordinate amount of billions of dollars in fraud. And you got to think that some blockchain system is going to be able to verify that better, so that we're not sending checks, billions of dollars in direct money to folks. So there's so many different ways to tackle it. And usually when I think about policy, I'm trying to understand what is the current environment, and are there ways that we could just, peel off some of the layers that's going to make the environment more friendly before I start to think, all right, we got to write a whole new thing. So that's why when Mike was showing me stuff from Rhode Island, I wanted to see what other states were doing. That Rhode Island bill was a big one. There was a lot going on. There was the hemp whole program with that too, and we have already got that kind of rolling here. So I didn't want to go too crazy. So that's why I looked to Wyoming, and Wyoming has the special deposit institutions where they're allowed to hold crypto, but they have to hold it all in reserves. So they can't be lending it out that way, as far as I understand. So that's probably the way that I'm looking at it now. But like I said, we need we need friendly legislators to come in after this year, so that December and then the following January we can actually build a coalition and start thinking about what we can pass. But not possible right now, unfortunately.
Great. Okay. Thank you for that, Nick. So let's move away blockchain for just a minute, and let's talk about something that recently happened in the news today, right? So we all know that Jeff Zucker, the president of CNN, is now no longer the president, right? He resigned over the fact that he had a consensual relationship with one of his coworkers, right? But what's funny about this is that this is from Cuomo, right? So Cuomo is the gift that keeps on giving. So the only reason that this came out today was because during their investigation into Andrew Cuomo, right, they've asked Zucker if he had this relationship, and he lied and said no, right? So as a result of the investigation into Andrew Cuomo, which in turn was a result of the Chris Cuomo, right? As a result of the investigation into Chris Cuomo, which was in turn caused by the investigation into Andrew Cuomo, this all dominoed down, and the effect was that it took out Jeff Zucker. So what are your thoughts on that, Mike?
I mean, my understanding is that they had this relationship for 20 years, and for the most part, they were both divorced, and there was no issue. I think that there's something else going on in CNN, because they were recently bought up by AT&T in the past couple of years. I'm not sure exactly what had happened, but there's definitely something there, because if you recall, like in the 2020 election, they were recorded secretly by Project Veritas, and they become more of a propaganda network than an actual news network. So I think that they're trying to rebrand CNN, and to rebrand CNN, they have to get rid of Jeff Zucker as well, because it doesn't work. Then if they're going to attract a bigger audience than they have, we probably have a bigger audience right now than they have right now, to be honest with you. So they want to attract half the audience they used to have before. They got to start getting rid of people from the top down. At least that's my opinion.
Okay. Oz, your thoughts on the today's revelations?
It goes to their Nielsen ratings. I mean, CNN has consistently been the lowest in terms of Nielsen ratings of any nationwide show out there across the nation, and they're only pulling anywhere between 1.6 to maybe a couple million people for any of their major shows. Whereas you look at something like Joe Rogan, which is a podcast, and what's he getting, like 10, 12 million people per podcast.
Right.
So there's some serious concerns there. The Cuomo, gift will continue to give, I think, for a couple of months. CNN itself has had to figure things out. I mean, look, CNN doesn't like having minority conservatives on, and we've made that very, very clear over the course of the past couple of years. I mean, Ronald, you, myself, Mike, we would never make it on air over there. But if you want to sit there and you want to talk about any of their pet projects or their pet ideals, they're happy to have you on. And I think that's a challenge, the folks that care about religious rights, that care about family values, that care about, just like the basic things, like let's make sure that we have a strong educational system. Let's make sure that we've got a decent healthcare system that works and not Obamacare. And, you have to harken back to the fact that Hillary Clinton had actually ended up pulling a good chunk of that out. Criminal justice reform, the way that President Trump had talked about that, we went from 50, 60,000 people inside of the federal system under Clinton to the Clinton rewrites of this, and we're now one of the largest incarcerators in the world 20 years later. And you've got a tremendous amount of minority folks that end up in Hawk in jail for just a variety of things. And so, that's what I think people are tired of. They're tired of this apologist nature of what you get with CNN. They're tired of what Zucker was espousing. And, the Nielsen ratings tell you on one side, but on the opposite side of this, America's just done. America wants, stability. America wants some sort of guidance in terms of what we're doing in this pandemic where there is no guidance. And America wants things to come back to, what they were, a reasonably strong economy, reasonably strong education, reasonably strong job opportunities. But where we are today, we've got an administration that has the dollar losing 1% of its value every month. And that's not boding well for a lot of people. And that's also why folks are looking at opportunities like cannabis, like cryptocurrency, like a variety of other things that are out there. Because outside of, owning property, which is about to go upside down because they're going to push interest rates up again and we're going to hit stagflation. The Democrats, the current administration that has both houses and the White House doesn't seem to have a plan. And America's tired of it.
Right. Now, Oz, you mentioned about the Nielsen ratings, right? And I think everybody knows that CNN, they consistently poll either dead last or close to dead last when it comes to ratings, right? So given the fact that their strategy for the past few years has been so wrong, why do you think they continue on with this strategy of,
it's do what you know, don't do what you don't know. And if you think about their executives and who they cater to and who they hobnob and rub shoulders with, I mean, it's just a bunch of jokey stuff. It's always it's the let them eat cake attitude. It's the one set of rules for us, one for you. I mean, it was the whole thing where Magic Johnson has AIDS and Gavin Newsom are sitting there with no masks at a game the other day, but they're arresting mothers and they're chastising children for not wearing masks. I mean, it's some for us and something else for you. It's this whole idea that as long as that they say that they're paying lip service to it, you have to listen to it. And I think that's what America's gotten tired of. They're like, look, we understand that you said you're going to come in and fix a whole bunch of stuff. You had an administration that said was going to do this. Nancy Pelosi said she was going to do this. All these other people said they're going to do this. Your news outlets from CNN forward said that they were going to address all of these issues. And guess what hasn't happened? Anything they promised. Right. Just the basic stuff.
Joe Biden, I think during his speech when he was sworn in, he was talking about how he was going to bring back, a civil environment where people can, get along again, right? Mm-hmm. But as we saw, last week, he openly called a Fox News reporter a stupid SOB, right? So how is that, any form of language that promotes harmony?
I'll take it one step further, and I'll just leave you guys with this thought. How is doubling down and telling a corporation, Spotify, to censorship Joe Rogan anything that espouses the Constitution and anything different than book bans? Like how is that different on any level?
Right.
And that's what we're getting from the Biden administration.
Right. And the most hypocritical thing to come out, today was that, Whoopi Goldberg was suspended from the View for 2 weeks. And you got these liberals and her co-hosts, they're up in arms, you can't do that, blah, blah, blah. So it's okay for them to cancel other people. But when the minute that one of their own is canceled, that's when they're up in arms.
Mm-hmm. Isn't that ridiculous? Think about what she said. She sat there and said that the Holocaust wasn't a race issue, that it was white on white crime. Okay. And I'm like, last time I checked, Jews weren't necessarily white people, but I can see how within the current race construct and conversation in America that is something. But there was a genocide that happened there.
Right.
And, when you have people being this cavalier about religion, this cavalier about genocides, and just discounting things that are really serious, you think that look, the Whoopi Goldbergs of the year of the world, really, if they can't have that conversation, Well, they're not going to have conversations about genocide in Africa. They're not going to have
China.
conversations about difficulties in Afghanistan. And they're not going to have conversations about the failure of this administration to lead in a pandemic, you know?
Right. And the funny thing about liberals is that whenever something happens, right, even if it's not race related, they like to insert race into it, right?
Mhm.
But then in this case, with the Holocaust, when it's actually something that's literally about race, they say it's not about race.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Upside down world.
What I thought was weird about that was she said something to the effect of, race is something that I see. I have to see the difference to know that it's about race. And I was just thinking, how do you get so far back around that you end up making the most racist argument for your perspective? Hitler's whole thing was the master race. Clearly it was a racist thing. So I just thought it was interesting that she's like, oh, no, that's just the way that I see it. I have to see the difference to know that it's racist. And just like, I think we're splitting hairs a little bit too far here. I think you need to get back to history.
Yeah.
Ronald, just on that note, Ronald, quickly, like I think that this is also to do with China, and a lot of these networks kind of are supporting the genocide Olympics, and and I think it's a disgrace that they're saying things like this, and we're about to have a ceremony in a country that's basically committing a modern day Holocaust in Xinjiang province. We lived in China, those people are treated. We've seen how they've been treated in the street. They treat them really with almost no respect. They're treated like non-humans in China, as it is just in regular day-to-day life. What they're doing to them in Xinjiang is even worse, and that's just disgusting that nobody has really stood up and said, listen, we can't do this, besides Trump, right? If he were in office, I think we definitely wouldn't be attending those games right now.
No, we wouldn't. I mean, think about this. You've got the Chinese committing genocide that's been documented by hundreds of organizations. And then they've got their pundits that are loyal to Xi on Twitter, on Instagram, and a bunch of other platforms that sit there and they're like, oh, there's nothing going on. And I'm like, we've seen some pretty horrible things. There's videos that have come back. And at the same point in time, they're blowing up churches. They're going after Christian populations. They're going after faith is what they're doing. And it's a very strange, like postmodern state of affairs. We've got George Soros saying that we need to get rid of Xi, or we need regime change in China. At the same time, we've got the Biden administration pretty much kowtowing to China and Iran inside of an argument on the Ukraine, where they don't seem to understand like what Russia is saying, and they keep pushing us towards war. It's kind of insanity on one side, but when you take a look at all their postmodern arguments, their argument is basically this: if I tell you you are now this is what you are. And that's the way that they approach things. And it's like, well, what does that have to do with my learned experience? What does that have to do with my race? What does that have to do with anything? And it allows them to just discount you as a human being. And they do that over and over and over again. And you see it with policy specifically inside of urban areas where they have kept tremendous amounts of folks down. And I mean, from, I would say African Americans to Chinese in Harlem to Latinos, yeah, we're not getting any service whatsoever. And we've got this kind of leadership. And then you've got leadership that runs gerrymandering all over the state of New York. I mean, you go to Brooklyn and you could literally walk maybe about 15 minutes. You'll walk through 4 congressional districts.
Yep,
like who sets things up like that? But it's all these games that they're playing. And I think what it comes down to is the Trump response in America. Well, you could have had Sheriff Joe Arpaio run if Trump hadn't gotten elected, and someone would have gotten elected along those lines, because America was tired of it and they wanted change, and we saw a bunch of changes happen. We saw less war. But the status quo of the Democrats is a war machine, and really kind of lip service on race relations, but not really solving anything. And we can do better.
Right. Oz, before you briefly touched upon the family structure and the family values in our country, right? Mm-hmm. So now I want to pose this question. So right now in the U.S., I believe there is a destruction of the family structure, right? And how do you think this phenomenon or this tragedy and the fact that there are now a lot of fatherless homes, how do you think this is contributing towards the higher rates of crimes, and what will this do to the Gen Z generation?
We've always said that it takes a community to raise a kid, and
Right.
we've always talked about those types of things, and it was always extended family or large communities or this, that, or the other thing, or just folks looking after each other. I think what we've come to is that, what was advocated for the past 20, 25 years through Gen X and really through millennials was like, you don't need a man. Okay, well, it's a big difference when you actually have a kid and you really realize like how much work that is. And it's even more when you realize that you're doing that inside of a pandemic and you have to homeschool and you have to do all these other things and the expenditures that are there. The challenge I think we're going to have is we're going to come to a crux of the left wanting to redefine what family is based upon their construct, which sometimes makes sense and sometimes makes no sense, versus the remainder of the United States that looks at things from the perspective of, I have a religion, I have a community structure, I have a family structure, and these are things that work for me, And it's just weird that you have folks on the left denigrating just wanting to exist because it doesn't fit the newfound sort of like postmodern ideals they have. And that's what we're dealing with across the country. And we're dealing with that in everywhere from just localities like all the way up to Maine, down to Texas. I mean, Texas is turning a little purple.
Right.
It's by no means going back to the 80s, but you've had net migration of 300,000 to 400,000 people, to Texas, to Florida, to a variety of other states. They're just tired of this stuff. New York has had a negative migration of over 500,000 people. And at the same point in time, all they keep doing is raising taxes and cutting services. That's not going to continue to make New York great. What that's going to continue to do is to chase people out of a city and to move them into different locales and make them vote different.
Right. Now, Nick, you are originally from Jersey, but now you live in Maine. And I think in Maine, there still is some sort of a semblance of a family structure there, right?
Yeah, I think so. There are a lot of old folks. We have a lot of old folks here for sure. Our school system is shrinking, but I think a lot of people point to there being multiple Maines, at least one or two. But so there is a very rural side of the state and there is a more coastal area. But like I said before, we need to bring more families in. And I think there is some need and some demand for that type of structure to be able to buy a house and have your own land and send your kids to a good school and, have a place that you can start a business and build a company. And I think there is that ideal in a lot of the country. And I think that's what Oz is speaking to, that folks are getting out of these cities that are just so restrictive and so constricting of life. That you kind of need that space. And we have that here. We just need the other side to make it worth it for folks to come here at first. But yeah, I think there is some need for the family structure here. That's
okay. Now, Mike, do you have anything to add to this discussion about the family structure, or rather the breakdown of the family structure in, I want to say the urban parts of the U.S.?
Definitely. I mean, New Jersey is the most dense state in the country, and Rhode Island is the second most dense state in the country. And we've also seen, I live in New York, but I'm in between Rhode Island and New York. So you can say I'm kind of like half and half. I was raised here, even though I was born in New York City. And I prefer living in New York, but the crime rate is so high right now in New York City that I'm just staying here for now. So basically, I've seen in my community, people that have both their father and their mother in the home, it's much more likely they're going to be successful. They're going to go to graduate high school, less likely to go to prison. And generally speaking, when you have a father in the home, I'm learning from my personal experience, you learn things like just discipline. Mothers can't really teach discipline the way that fathers can teach discipline, especially when it's men, when they're raising boys that want to become men, successful men in the future. And delayed gratification too. That's something that men can teach men. That's not something that, women are really good at teaching men. We have men seem to be more like, we think more towards the future and building things, and just we're like the center of society in the sense of that we progress society economically, and women are more the nurturers, people that look to take care of the kids day to day. They're not really thinking about teaching, instilling these values of like long-term goals into children. So I think that having a father and a mother, that yin and yang in Chinese culture, is very important in any family structure.
Okay, great, thank you. Now, speaking of the breakdown of the family structure, I think I'm not sure if it's because of a result or if it's a cause of it, but nowadays we see a rise in the usage of like dating apps like Tinder, right? And how do you think, guys, these apps? Well, first of all, let me ask you guys, and you got to be honest. Have you guys ever used these apps like Tinder or? I don't
I'm
know.
on it right now, actually. No, I'm
Oh, really?
no. I use it though sometimes, often. Not too often I use it.
Now, do you think these apps are the reason why a lot of young men in our country today, are confused and can't find love? And how do you think this relates in relation to the 80-20 rule?
Yeah.
Let's start with Mike.
Yeah. So the 80-20 rule states basically that 80% of women are going after 20% of men. Just to give you an idea, I'm 5'10" and a half. My hair that I've grown out, I'm basically 6 feet. One time I was dating a girl she was like 4'9", very obese girl. Hey, I was going through some stuff. I was younger. It was like 5 or 6 years ago. And she was upset that I didn't have a 6-pack abs. But she wanted a guy that was 6 feet tall, had 6-pack abs, had a 6-figure income. She had no real job at the time, and she was just a short, fat girl. So you're seeing a lot of that, I think, in my generation, especially in general, Gen X, where you're seeing women have super high standards, like the 6'6s, right? And then a lot of men, unfortunately, I've met some of them, they're 23, 24, 25 years old, and they've never had any sexual experiences. And I feel bad because when I was younger, that wasn't the case. Women basically, sorry to say like this, but they're basically throwing themselves at you. Especially if, in our school, like if you were a virgin, the girls would be like, oh my God, so cute. And, what are you doing later? No, but like, yeah, nowadays I don't really see that happening for a lot of kids in Gen Z. And I feel bad for them because of that.
Okay.
This is my personal experience.
All right, Oz, do you have any thoughts on this?
I think it's a mix. On the one side, I mean, I recently started trying to date again a little bit. That's amusing. I'll tell you a couple of things. One is that if you're dating within faith circles, it's different. But if you're going on Tinder and OkCupid and Plenty of Fish and all these other apps that are out there, it's a target-rich environment. And people aren't necessarily looking for anything serious. They might be looking for something a little bit more fun. I think what's happened is that we had so much media that sold people the Sex and the City ideal of, go out there and sow your oats in your 20s, maybe even in your 30s, and then go and try and find someone. But then the problem is that when you get to to Mike's point, just kind of askew, but it's like when you get to the point, you're like, okay, well, I'd like to get married, or I'd like to get serious, and I'm looking for these types of things. Girls always tell you they have their lists. No one really asks guys what their lists are. And in a lot of cases, we're looking for someone that, might make a good mom, is someone who is going to be reasonably stable with us, and is someone that we can grow with, because that's what you're looking for. It's not necessarily the same things that you were looking for when you're maybe about 22. And I think that's the challenge inside of the dating environment today, because it's unless you're going through, I would say, like religious dating services or someone setting you up or something like that, it's a pretty target-rich environment, and there isn't really kind of a goal to it. It's just, you can date, but what's next?
Right. Now, like these dating apps, they make it very easy, right? Super easy for a guy to find like multiple partners, and the same with girls, right? So do you think these apps are in a way sort of like discouraging people from kind of settling down? Nick, what do you think?
It's weird. It gives you like a menu of humans, right? Like, and it's based on some pictures and like a paragraph that they wrote maybe. And man, it's just such a weird way to meet people. It's hard enough to meet people anyway, I think, older than 30, and then add the pandemic and social distancing to that and the aftermath of that. And through the online dating lens is just, it can be just baffling and sort of just mind-boggling. Sorry, my dog is freaking out at my feet here, so you might be hearing some growling. But it's just so weird to be presented with a menu of people that, potential suitors, and then you sort of get into this weird thing where you both swiped in the correct direction, and so now you're in this weird like text message conversation, but within the app, and you need to somehow facilitate that into actually meeting the person to get to know who they are, and then feeling it out where to go. It's a totally different way to meet somebody than running into someone at a bar, either haphazardly or through a friend, and where you have that initial first interplay, interpersonal. So much communication is nonverbal, obviously, and so when you distill that down to pictures and text message conversations, of course you're going to give people some weird, warped view of romance, and I think that's, I think our generation had. I was born in 1990, so I think my generation is dealing with the weirdness of coming out of maybe some idealism of our parents and what marriage and romance is, and trying to deal with that in our own way. But this is just a whole nother layer that separates us more from the humanity of what, getting to know another person and actually finding love is. So, I'm getting back into using them nowadays, and man, it's just so unnatural, and I don't see how it makes us better.
Right. And especially in a state like Maine, it must be really hard to meet people since there's like 5 people there, right? So
Oh man, it's hilarious. I just want to add one thing, because I talked to my coworker about this. So we've had this whole thing with our governor. She mandated the vaccination for COVID for the healthcare workers. So we always say like, hey, are you seeing all these travel nurses coming up on the dating apps? Because they're a ton of travel nurses are coming in because they can get around that, and they're paid like 4 or 5 times as much. I just think that's funny. That's how you see that anecdotally come through. But yeah, that's the new infusion of people on the dating apps.
Right, I actually have a great idea, because I think Oz, Mike, and Nick, you guys are still single now, right?
Mhm.
I think one of these days you guys should all come to New York City and just hit the bars, right? And I could just tag
Old-fashioned
along,
way.
sort of like
It's not the same as they used to be, Ronald. Like, you guys should come to
It-
Roundtable.
it's
Maine has
very
nice bars.
different. Yeah, I have to tell you, meeting people in person in New York is a little different nowadays.
Very different.
And I would think that like cultural events, some other stuff, it kind of works, but the city's kind of desolate when it comes to a lot of this stuff. I mean, yeah, the bar scene's there, but
It's not the same as before COVID, though. Before pandemic, it was much easier to meet people at bars or just general events, right? Eventbrite.
Didn't
Find an event and just go.
Didn't something like a third of the restaurants close in the city?
it's high. I don't know if it's a third, but a significant amount of closed. Midtown is a ghost town. There's questions on if people are coming back to work, and if they also need all that office space, and beyond that, I mean, places that you would go to get lunch and things like that, they're not there,
Nice.
and the prices are a lot higher. So you're gonna, if they don't get New York's act together from the perspective of crime forward, you're going to see a mass exodus, and it's going to look very much like it did in the 1970s all over again.
Escape from New York all over again.
All right, guys. One final question for tonight, and this was a question that I think was actually brought up by Mike. So we briefly touched upon the situation in China, right?
Mhm.
Do you think, and I'll start with Mike, and I'll finish off with Oz.
Okay.
Mike, do you think China will make a play on Taiwan at some point?
That's what I studied there, and I think you studied that too. We both went to Zhejiang University.
Right.
I think that if they're gonna make a play on Taiwan, the perfect time would be right after the Olympics. Basically the U.S. has sent a delegation there. We've delegitimized their government, and if we let Ukraine get taken over, which I don't even know what's going on with that. I'm just saying, just hypothetically speaking, I think that Biden is making things worse in Ukraine. If he goes into Ukraine, Russia will definitely go there because they're not part of NATO. I'm just saying, depending on how Ukraine plays out in the Olympic Games, I think the best time to make a play after Taiwan is right after the Olympics.
Mhm.
If they're going to do it.
Nick, what do you think?
About China making a play on Taiwan.
Right.
I don't know. It's a little bit out of my depth, and the dog goes freaking out again. I think it's just. It's unfortunate that we're even participating in the Olympics at this point. The Olympics are being held in Beijing to this point. Give the Chinese government the legitimacy that it's craving after 2 years of showing the world how totalitarian public health works, and potentially being involved in the creation of the virus that caused the pandemic. We'll see how that goes. But it's just at this point we can't back out of that. But I also at some point we need to be looking for ways to make peace. And if going to the Olympics and sort of working through this situation helps to smooth it over and bring peace, that's good, but man, that's a tough one for me to weigh in on knowledgeably, I'll say.
Right. By the way, I think your dog is on Twitter, and I think he found like a really hot dog, so that's why he's kind of going nuts. All right. Okay, let's finish off this conversation with Mr. Sultan.
I think you're looking at the creation of an axis in between China, Russia, and Iran. That's number one. Number two, Iran's probably it's looking like a couple months away from having enough visible material for a bomb. While we're watching Biden literally fumble the ball over and over again in Ukraine, Putin said, give us a little respect. Biden's push is continually towards war, and those are the overtures that we're getting. The Ukraine's ramping up 100,000 more to their military, so they're going to have a very large standing military. We've got tank columns in Poland. We are sending rocket launchers to the front in Ukraine from Poland. We're using, the Polish military as our proxy. Look, this is going to have cascading impacts. At the same point in time, you have to look at China and how they're going to play inside of this. China is doing a whole PR barrage with the Olympics, but I don't think it's being seen by the world the way that they would like the world to see it. And at the same point in time, you've already got a ton of COVID infections. So how are you going to have an Olympics where the Japanese team tested positive, the Norwegian team tested positive, a couple other teams have tested positive? Like how are you going to manage all of this? So to me, it's a very strange state of geopolitics. We are on the cusp of China starting something really big. But at the same point in time, they've got to balance that against potential stagflation, the collapse of their commercial real estate sector, and how that would have cascading impacts on their ability to actually wage war in Taiwan. And then there's the big question, the Seventh Fleet. And that goes back to the Trump administration, but also the Biden administration. What's next over there?
Okay, thank you, Oz. And I want to thank each and every single one of you gentlemen for coming on tonight for this great discussion on these very topics, right? We have a lot to discuss, and I hope to have you guys back on in the future for more great discussion on all these different topics and much, much more. So, guys, I want to thank you, Mike, Oz, Nick, for spending part of your Wednesday night with Real Talk with Ronnie. It's been a pleasure, and I hope to see you guys on again really, really soon. Okay.
All right. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everybody.
Bye.
Okay, guys. So that was our episode of Real Talk with Ronnie, our roundtable edition tonight. As you can tell, we covered a myriad of issues. We talked about crypto, the destruction of the family system, apps like Tinder, and how they're sort of de-incentivizing people to get into stable relationships. And lastly, we talked about the effects of China on the global stage and what they may or may not do in the future. So what a great show tonight. We covered a range of issues. We will be back this Sunday. Okay, well, we're back every Sunday, right? But this Sunday we will have two great guests on. We have our first guest coming up is Mr. Mike Koontz. Mike ran for state senate here in New Jersey this past year in District 37. He came up short, but now he's on his way doing a lot of other ventures, and I believe he's starting a new venture within the news industry. So we're very happy to have him come on so we can talk to him about his venture and what he plans on doing for the future. Our next guest on Sunday is Mr. James Martyr. Mr. Martyr is running for Congress as a Republican candidate in the state of Illinois. So we are very happy to have him on so we can talk about his run, his candidacy, and what he hopes to do for the great state of Illinois. All right. So, guys, you were watching Real Talk with Ronnie. Of course, if you feel like you have a great story to share, please email us. Okay. Email us at realtalkwithronnie. Okay. realtalkwithronnie@gmail.com. And we're very happy to have you on to talk about your story and about, and any issues that you want to talk about. Please follow us on Facebook. Facebook.com/realtalkwithronnie. Go to our page, like it, follow it, share it. We also have a YouTube channel that we're trying to grow. Okay. If you go on YouTube, search for Real Talk with Ronnie, and you will find my mug. And once you see that, please subscribe, like, and share. Okay, guys. And one more thing. As you guys may know, I'm currently in the race for Bergen County Commissioner here in Bergen County. I ran last year. I was the nominee. I came up short by 2 points. So I'm running again this year. See, the way that it works here in Bergen County is that these commissioner seats, there's 7 of them total, and they are on a staggered basis. So every single year, there's going to be a few seats up. Last year, there were 2 seats up. This year, there are 3 seats up. So I'm continuing my campaign from last year into this year, and we hope to finish what we started last year. But in the meantime, if you want to learn more about my campaign, please go to ronaldjosephLynn.com. Okay. Or you can go to my new campaign website, which is very, very easy. It's the same as my slogan from last year, winwithlynn.us. Winwithlynn.us. It will direct you to my campaign page. And on that page, you'll also see links on how to get to my podcast, Real Talk with Ronnie. All right. So that page pretty much is the central hub for all my different ventures. Right. So if you go to ronaldjosephLynn.com or winwithlynn.us, you will see it all. Okay. So, guys, I want to thank you for joining me tonight. It is February 2nd, 2022. You're now watching Real Talk with Ronnie live on our Wednesday edition, our Roundtable show. We'll be back this Sunday at 8 p.m. Same place, same time. All right, guys. So thank you, and have a great rest of the week. And I will see you all on Sunday. Bye-bye.